Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the fascinating and often surprising world of rare coins, where sometimes what seems like just an everyday pocket change item can turn out to be worth a staggering fortune. And today we're diving deep into one of the most captivating stories in numismatic history, the 1964 5-cent coin that, because of its unusual and extremely rare errors and mistakes, has been valued in certain cases as high as $5 million. A figure so extraordinary that it almost sounds like the setup to a tall tale, yet it is rooted in the fascinating realities of minting, error production, rarity, and the insatiable interest of collectors who will go to almost any lengths to own a truly unique piece. And while to the untrained eye a 1964 nickel might look exactly like the billions of others produced that year, to an expert collector with a magnifying glass, a sharp mind, and a detailed understanding of minting anomalies, the details hidden in its surfaces tell a completely different story, one of accidental perfection and imperfection, a combination of circumstances so rare that it borders on miraculous. And to understand why this coin can command such dizzying prices, we have to start with the context of its creation, because 1964 was a pivotal year for U.S. coinage. With the mint under enormous pressure due to a national coin shortage that had banks scrambling to meet demand, and the Treasury Department authorizing massive increases in production, and in that climate, speed often took precedence over meticulous quality control, opening the door for minting errors that in calmer years might have been caught and destroyed before release. But in this case, many slipped through into circulation, where decades later they would be rediscovered and recognized for their rarity. And when it comes to this particular 5-cent piece, the Jefferson nickel, the first thing to understand is that it was minted in two main locations that year, Philadelphia and Denver, and differences between the output of those mints already create points of interest for collectors. But the coin we're talking about here isn't just a run-of-the-mill 1964 nickel from either mint, it's one that bears extremely unusual characteristics, sometimes multiple errors on a single specimen, that make it a numismatic unicorn, such as double dies, overstrikes, planchet flaws, and misaligned dies, each of which in isolation could make a coin worth hundreds or thousands, but when combined, can launch it into the stratosphere of value. And perhaps the most famous error type that year involved double dies, where the design elements, such as the inscriptions, "In God We Trust, Liberty," and the date, 1964, appear double due to a misalignment during the die hubbing process, creating a ghost-like second image that is instantly apparent to those who know what to look for, and when that doubling is crisp, especially on both obverse and reverse, it becomes highly desirable. And then there are overstrikes, where an existing coin has been struck again, sometimes even over a completely different denomination or earlier date, a mishap that can result in bizarre hybrids showing fragments of multiple designs, something almost impossible to replicate intentionally without being caught. And equally fascinating are planchet errors, where the blank metal disc intended to be struck with the design is itself flawed, perhaps clipped, cracked, or composed of the wrong alloy entirely, such as being struck on a silver planchet intended for a dime, which can make the coin both visually and metallurgically distinct, and misaligned dies can cause the design to be shifted noticeably off-center, with part of the image missing and part of the blank planchet visible, adding yet another layer of rarity. But beyond these, the 1964 nickel is infamous among advanced collectors for transitional and experimental strikes, as 1964 was on the cusp of major changes in U.S. coinage metals, leading to test runs and irregularities that should never have entered public hands, yet somehow did. And when a single coin combines 2, 3, or even more of these anomalies, say, a double die obverse, a misaligned reverse, struck on the wrong planchet, with a mintmark repunched, it becomes a once-in-a-lifetime find. And in the rarest cases, authenticated by top grading services, auction bidding wars can push values into the millions, especially when provenance, condition, and error uniqueness align perfectly. And you might wonder how such a coin could survive undetected for decades, but the truth is that for much of their life, these coins passed through countless hands unnoticed, living mundane existences in change jars, vending machines, and desk drawers, until one day a keen-eyed individual spots something unusual under good lighting. Perhaps the doubling of a letter or the strange shimmer of a wrong metal composition, prompting a closer look, and then begins the process of authentication, often involving submission to renowned grading services like PCGS or NGC, where experts confirm not only the coin's authenticity but also its precise error types, assign it a grade based on condition, and encapsulate it in protective holders with detailed labels. And in the case of this legendary 1964 nickel valued at $5 million, the story often involves both impeccable preservation, sometimes in mint state condition with virtually no wear, and a combination of errors so improbable that no other known examples exist, making it literally one of one. And scarcity in the numismatic world is a powerful force, because while thousands of collectors might desire a certain coin, if there is only a single specimen available, competition drives prices into realms that seem absurd to outsiders but entirely rational to those who understand the market. And beyond pure rarity, there is also the allure of the story, because collectors are as much historians and treasure hunters as they are investors, and owning a coin that encapsulates a pivotal moment in minting history, tied to the economic pressures of the mid-1960s, the shift away from silver in coinage, and the imperfections born of frantic production, is akin to owning a tangible piece of a larger narrative. A physical link to the past that fits in the palm of your hand, and these narratives are amplified when the coin's provenance includes appearances in major auctions, coverage in numismatic journals, and mentions in specialized reference books, further solidifying its legendary status. And while skeptics might scoff at the idea of a nickel fetching millions, the numismatic market has repeatedly shown that collectors will pay astronomical sums for unique era coins. With precedents in other denominations such as the famous 1955 double die cent or the 1943 copper Lincoln cent, both of which have sold for six figures. Despite being far more common than a one-of-a-kind multi-era 1964 nickel, and as we consider the specific mistakes that could lead to such astronomical value, it's worth noting that even within the category of doubled dies, there are degrees of desirability, with some doubling so minor that it requires magnification to see, while the most valuable examples display dramatic shifts visible to the naked eye, sometimes giving letters and numbers a three-dimensional, almost vibrating appearance. And similarly, misaligned strikes can range from barely perceptible shifts to dramatic 50% off-center strikes where parts of the design are missing entirely. And when such an extreme misalignment happens in combination with a different major error, the value can increase exponentially. And then there are die cracks and cuds, where a portion of the die itself breaks and leaves a raised, irregular blob or fissure on the coin's surface, a type of mint damage that can be both visually striking and indicative of the coin's unique production history. And though die cracks alone rarely make a coin worth millions, in conjunction with other rare attributes they add character and distinction, and perhaps one of the most tantalizing possibilities is the existence of 1964 nickels struck with proof dies but accidentally released into circulation, creating proof-like business strikes with unusually sharp details and mirror-like fields, something so unexpected that any verified example would draw enormous attention. And when you combine proof-like qualities with multiple striking errors, you're looking at the numismatic equivalent of a perfect storm, which is exactly the kind of scenario that fuels multi-million-dollar valuations. And because so many of these features are only confirmed under microscopic examination or precise metallurgical analysis, many extraordinary coins may still be hiding in plain sight, unrecognized in the pockets and coin jars of everyday people, waiting for someone to give them a closer look. And this possibility is what keeps the hunt alive for collectors, the dream that perhaps one day they might stumble upon a coin that not only pays for itself many times over but also cements their place in numismatic history. And when you hear about a 1964 nickel selling for $5 million, it's not simply the metal or the face value you're thinking about. It's the confluence of minting mishaps, historical context, market demand, and narrative allure that transforms an otherwise common object into a priceless artifact. And as we explore these stories, it becomes clear that the true magic of numismatics lies not just in the monetary value but in the way these coins act as silent witnesses to history, carrying within them the tiny but telling fingerprints of human error, industrial process, and the relentless march of time. And this is why collectors will pore over rolls of nickels for hours, scrutinizing dates, mint marks, and design details, searching for that one coin that defies probability, a task made all the more exciting by knowing that such finds have indeed happened, with the $5 million 1964 nickel standing as a beacon of possibility, reminding us that even in the most ordinary of objects, extraordinary stories can be hidden, waiting only for curiosity and attention to bring them to light. And that is the heart of why this coin, with its unique combination of doubled dies, overstrikes, wrong planchets, misalignments, die cracks, proof-like surfaces, and unmatched preservation, has earned its place as one of the most valuable nickels ever known, a singular testament to the quirks of history, the artistry of minting, and the unending human fascination with rarity and imperfection. So if you have a 1964 nickel tucked away somewhere, maybe it's time to take a closer look. Because you never know when a small piece of metal could hold a story worth millions. Welcome back once again to this deep dive into the extraordinary, and sometimes downright unbelievable stories of coins that, while looking like everyday pocket change to most people, carry hidden features that turn them into multimillion-dollar treasures. And in this chapter of our journey, we're turning the spotlight onto another remarkable piece of numismatic history, the 1980 D5-cent coin. A Jefferson nickel from the Denver Mint that, under the right circumstances and with a very specific, an exceedingly rare set of errors and minting quirks, has been known to command values reaching an eye-popping $3 million. And just like the legendary 1964 nickel we explored before, the true value here lies not in the coin's metal content or its face value but in the combination of rarity, error types, condition, and the intense desire among collectors to own something truly one of a kind. And to understand how a coin from 1980 could ever reach such dizzying figures, we have to consider the backdrop of U.S. coinage at the time, because by the late 1970s and into 1980 the Mint had modernized much of its equipment and production processes, introducing more efficient high-speed presses and refining quality control measures, which in theory should have reduced the number of major minting errors. But as any seasoned collector knows, even with technological improvements, no system is immune to human oversight, equipment fatigue, or the occasional fluke of physics, and in fact, the transition to new machinery sometimes creates its own unique problems, leading to error varieties that are unlike anything produced in earlier decades. And in the case of the 1980 D nickel, the Denver Mint was churning out millions upon millions of coins to meet national demand, and among them, hidden like tiny metallic anomalies, were a small handful of pieces that emerged with a combination of errors so improbable that they immediately became the stuff of numismatic legend. And one of the most talked about categories for this year involves off-metal strikes, where a nickel design was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, such as a copper nickel-clad dime blank, or, even rarer, a copper cent planchet, resulting in a coin that is both smaller or lighter than normal and composed of the wrong alloy, which can produce subtle but telling differences in color, weight, and diameter. And in the most sensational documented cases, the 1980 D nickel has been found struck on experimental planchets that were never supposed to leave the Mint, possibly related to test runs for coinage metal composition changes considered at the time, and these anomalies, when authenticated, instantly catapult the coin into a realm of extreme desirability. And then there's the matter of dramatic off-center strikes, where the design is shifted so far from its intended position that large blank areas of planchet remain visible, sometimes cutting important inscriptions or design elements in half. And while minor off-centers are relatively common, extreme examples, say, 60% or more off-center, combined with a full visible date and mint mark, are exceedingly rare and highly prized. And when such an off-center strike occurs on an off-metal planchet, you've got the kind of double error that sets auction rooms abuzz. And we can't talk about the 1980 D nickel without mentioning doubled dies, which, although less common in this period compared to the error-rich years of the 1950s and 1960s, still occurred, and when they do, especially on devices like Liberty or In God We Trust, The doubling can create an almost holographic effect that's both visually captivating and instantly recognizable under magnification, and when paired with an already unusual planchet or striking condition, this kind of doubling turns a rare coin into an irreplaceable masterpiece. And another layer of intrigue for the 1980D is the phenomenon of repunched mintmarks. RPMs, a relic of the era when mintmarks were still hand-punched into dies rather than applied during the master die stage, meaning that slight misplacements or multiple impressions could occur, resulting in a mintmark that shows traces of being punched more than once, sometimes in noticeably different positions, and while RPMs on their own may not make a coin worth millions, in the hyperrare universe where a coin has multiple distinct error types, they add to the mystique and the total valuation. And then there's the ultra-rare scenario of a proof-like or full-step strike from Denver in 1980, because while the mint did not produce proof nickels there, exceptional die polish and perfect striking pressure could sometimes result in business strike coins with mirror-like fields and razor-sharp details, especially on Monticello's steps, and full steps on a Jefferson nickel are a big deal for specialists. With a perfectly struck, error-laden, proof-like 1980D being virtually unheard of, and the few that exist have drawn frenzied bidding wars, and much like our earlier discussion of the 1964 nickel, the appeal here is amplified by the combination of features, because while each of these anomalies, off-metal, off-center, double die, RPM, proof-like surfaces, can individually make a coin valuable, their appearance together on a single coin creates the numismatic equivalent of lightning in a bottle, something so rare that it might only exist once or twice in the entire mintage. And it is this perfect storm of rarity that pushes the value into the multimillion-dollar range, and just as with the 1964, many of these extraordinary 1980D nickels likely spent years or decades circulating unnoticed, perhaps rattling around in a cash register or coin jar, until one day someone with a sharp eye and a bit of curiosity noticed that the weight seemed off, or the design looked strangely shifted, or the surface gleamed more brightly than expected, prompting a trip to a coin shop, or submission to a grading service, where experts confirmed the find and the coin's journey from everyday object to priceless treasure began. And the market for these coins is not just about the cold math of rarity and condition but also about the stories they carry, the drama of their discovery. The thrill of knowing you hold in your hand a piece of metal that somehow survived the rigid processes of a modern mint, while defying all the rules, and in the case of the most famous 1980D nickel sales, provenance plays a role too, because coins with well-documented histories and appearances in major numismatic auctions tend to command even higher prices, and in some cases the buzz generated by these sales has inspired countless others to start searching through their change, hoping to spot a similar marvel. And while it's tempting to think that in today's era of automated minting such extreme errors couldn't possibly slip through, history shows us otherwise, and it is that sliver of possibility that keeps the hunt alive, making the 1980D 5-cent coin not just a collector's dream but also a reminder that treasures still exist in the most ordinary of places, waiting to be found by those willing to look closely. And so the story of the $3 million 1980D nickel becomes part of a larger truth about numismatics. That value is as much about human fascination, narrative, and the romance of rarity as it is about the tangible object itself. And if you ever happen to see a 1980D nickel that feels different, looks off, or has details that don't quite match the norm, it might just be worth examining under a loupe, because as we've seen, even a humble 5-cent coin can sometimes hold a secret worth millions. And now, keeping our journey rolling through the remarkable world of Jefferson nickels that have stunned collectors and broken auction records, we arrive at yet another incredible story, this time focusing on the elusive and captivating 1981D 5-cent coin from the Denver Mint, a year and mint combination that to most people would seem utterly ordinary, but to those in the know has yielded examples so spectacularly flawed and so rare in their survival that they have been valued as high as $2 million, a figure that seems almost absurd for something that could easily go unnoticed in a handful of change, yet becomes entirely logical once you understand the unique mix of minting errors, historical circumstances, and collector demand that converge in these coins, and the first thing to remember about 1981 is that it was a transitional moment in U.S. minting practices. As the mint continued to refine high-speed production systems installed in the late 1970s while still relying on certain older methods for die preparation and quality checks, and Denver in particular was producing massive quantities of coins to meet national demand, meaning that even with modernized equipment, small mechanical failures, human oversights, and occasional anomalies were inevitable, and when they happened on a nickel planchet, they sometimes produced results so unusual that they slipped past inspectors and entered circulation as the rarest of the rare, and among the most famous and valuable. Errors for the 1981 D nickel are dramatic wrong planchet strikes, where the Jefferson design was inadvertently impressed on a blank intended for another denomination, often a clad dime planchet or, even rarer, a copper cent or foreign coin blank, producing differences in size, weight, color, and edge appearance that stand out to a trained eye, and while a wrong planchet strike in itself can fetch thousands, when combined with other anomalies, the value can multiply exponentially, and one such combination that has set collectors buzzing is the pairing of an off-metal planchet with an extreme off-center strike, where the design is shifted so far from center that large blank areas of the planchet remain visible while still preserving a full date and min mark, a requirement for maximum value because without them the coin loses a crucial part of its identity, and adding to the intrigue. Some 1981 D nickels have been discovered with strikingly bold doubled dies, particularly on the obverse in the inscriptions, Liberty and In God We Trust, giving the letters a ghost-like doubling that can be seen even without magnification, a feature that collectors prize not only for its visual appeal but also for the rarity of such dramatic doubling in this later era, and in other cases, repunched min marks have been identified, the result of the D being hand-punched into the die more than once, slightly off from the first impression, creating a shadow-like effect that is subtle but, when clear and combined with other errors, adds a further layer of uniqueness, and some of the most jaw-dropping 1981 D nickels also displayed die cracks, cuds, or retained cud breaks, where a portion of the die face fractured, leaving raised irregular shapes or lines on the struck coin, features that tell a story about the stress the dies were under during production, and while such die damage alone might not fetch millions, its presence alongside wrong planchets, off-centers, or doubled dies can create the kind of multi-error specimen that is literally irreplaceable, and another tantalizing category for this year involves fully struck, proof-like surfaces with full steps on Monticello, something Denver did not intentionally produce for proofs but which occasionally occurred due to fresh, polished dies and perfect striking pressure, creating coins with a mirror-like finish and razor-sharp detail that are breathtaking under good lighting, and when such an immaculate surface is married to a dramatic minting blunder, you have the numismatic equivalent of a perfect storm, and it is exactly these rare combinations, off-metal composition, extreme off-center strike, dramatic doubled die, repunched mint mark, die cracks or cuds, proof-like finish, that have made certain 1981 D nickels among the most valuable post-1960 Jeffersons ever known, with the finest and rarest examples reaching auction results in the $2 million range, especially when backed by solid provenance and high grades from leading certification services like PCGS or NGC, and part of the charm in these finds is the fact that many of them were likely overlooked for years, passing quietly through vending machines, cash drawers, or coin jars until one day someone with an inquisitive eye spotted something unusual and began the process of research and authentication, leading to discoveries that can quite literally change someone's financial situation overnight. And while some might think that by 1981 such dramatic errors would be impossible to escape the mint's quality control, the reality is that the sheer volume of coins being produced combined with the occasional human or mechanical lapse means that rare mistakes still happened, and for collectors, that sliver of possibility is enough to keep the hunt alive, encouraging them to examine every 1981 D nickel they come across, just in case lightning strikes twice. And when lightning does strike in the form of a $2 million nickel, it's more than just a piece of metal, it's a tangible link to the quirks and unpredictability of minting history, a tiny but powerful reminder that perfection is overrated and that sometimes it's the flaws that make something truly priceless. And moving forward in our epic journey through the world of multimillion-dollar Jefferson nickels, we now turn our attention to yet another fascinating chapter, this time involving a 1982 5-cent coin that, under normal circumstances, would be one of the countless billions produced by the Denver Mint and destined to live out its life passing anonymously through commerce. Yet, in the extraordinary cases that have been authenticated and documented, certain examples from this year have fetched values soaring into the upper millions, $2 million or more, not because of any precious metal content, as these coins are composed of the same copper-nickel alloy as their mundane counterparts, but because of a perfect confluence of minting errors, rarity, and collector fervor that makes them numismatic treasures. And to appreciate just how such a thing is possible, we need to understand the shifting landscape of coin production in the early 1980s, because 1982 was a pivotal year in U.S. coinage history, particularly for the Lincoln cent, which underwent a metal composition change from bronze to copper-plated zinc, and while the nickel denomination did not experience a similar change, the broader environment of experimentation, planchet supply adjustments, and increased production pressures set the stage for unusual and occasionally spectacular minting anomalies. And in the case of the 1982 D nickel, the Denver Mint's massive output meant that even the tiniest lapse in die preparation, planchet feeding, or striking could result in rare varieties slipping into circulation, and among the most celebrated of these are wrong planchet strikes, including those struck on copper-plated zinc cent planchets, a scenario almost certainly tied to the composition change in the cent, resulting in a smaller, thinner, reddish-toned nickel, with Jefferson's portrait compressed to fit the smaller surface. An instantly recognizable oddity to anyone who notices the unusual size or color, and beyond these, there are examples struck on dime planchets, yielding a lighter, silver-toned coin with incomplete design elements near the rim, and both types of wrong planchet errors are highly collectible on their own, but when combined with other mistakes they become the stuff of numismatic legend, and one such legendary combination is an off-center strike on a wrong planchet nickel, where the design is dramatically shifted, sometimes as much as 50 to 70% off-center, leaving wide arcs of blank metal and giving the coin a surreal, distorted appearance while still preserving a full visible date and mint mark, which is crucial for desirability. And then there are doubled dies, which in 1982 can be found with dramatic separation in lettering and numerals, particularly in Liberty, and the digits of the date, creating a clear and appealing doubling that pops under magnification. And when such a doubled die is paired with an unusual planchet, the rarity skyrockets, and yet another layer of intrigue comes from repunched mint marks, a variety still possible in 1982 as mint marks were not yet part of the master die, and bold RPMs showing 2 or even 3 impressions of the D can be found, especially desirable when clean and distinct, and certain 1982 D nickels have been discovered with remarkable proof-like surfaces, likely struck early in a die's life with highly polished fields and sharp, crisp design details including full steps on Monticello, a feature so prized by Jefferson nickel specialists that it can multiply the value of even a normal coin, let alone a rare error, and die cracks and cuds also appear in this year, with some spectacular retained cuds forming raised shapes across the fields, evidence of a failing die's last gasps before retirement, and in rare cases, multiple errors are present together, such as a wrong planchet strike with an off-center design, a double die obverse, and a repunched mint mark, all on a coin in mint state condition with proof-like surfaces, an almost impossibly rare combination that collectors would quite literally fight over in an auction room, driving bids well into 7 figures. And this is exactly the kind of scenario that explains the multi-million-dollar valuations attached to the most spectacular 1982 D nickels, because in numismatics, rarity is compounded by condition, desirability, and the sheer novelty of a piece that defies the norms of minting, and the stories surrounding these coins only add to their allure. Tales of them being plucked from pocket change by sharp-eyed collectors, spotted in estate sale coin jars, or discovered in the back of an old dresser decades after they were struck, each time turning what seemed like an ordinary piece of change into an object of life-changing value. And while the Mint's official stance is that such extreme errors are incredibly rare, the fact that they exist at all keeps the search alive, inspiring collectors to examine every 1982D nickel they come across with a loupe and a scale, because the next great discovery might still be hiding in plain sight, waiting to make someone's fortune and write the next chapter in the ongoing saga of Jefferson nickels that have achieved legendary, multi-million-dollar status.